Good morning. Today on Spotlight, a full plate of important and timely topics. Auto insurance reform, the Attorney General's contempt of Congress, the passing of Bob Berg, Detroit getting ready for Judge Damon J. Keefe's farewell, and Michigan Roundtable's inaugural Conference for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Our Spotlight panels of Hollowell, Hammer, and Keith, and Sampson and Spreitzer will tackle it all. It's Mother's Day, May the 12th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. Welcome to Spotlight, all of you.
Glad to be here.
Butch Hollowell, I'm going to start with you. The most recent news, tail end of this week, was auto insurance reform.
Yeah.
The House passed the bill. It now has to go back over to the Senate. Governor didn't seem to like what came out of the Senate. Is she going to like this any better? And are we finally on the road to having auto insurance reform? And I know it's been something passionate with you for years.
It's been the work of my life. We need the rate relief, and it's really a good thing that these reform bills have begun to move through both the House and the Senate. The fact of the matter is that since 1973 that we've been under no fault, we have the highest rates in the nation, both the state and in the city. 6 in 10 Detroiters drive without insurance and are paying on average at $3,400 a year, so it's unaffordable. These new bills, which give individuals the choice of either unlimited or $500,000, $250,000, or $50,000, and making sure the medical reimbursement rate is tied to the workers' comp rate, is a good thing. So I'm hoping they're able to reconcile those bills, bake in the rate relief.
But bottom line for people, will premiums come down?
They will. They will, and that's what they've been working at. I think it's a really good sign. Again, we've been waiting for it, and this system had all of the best intentions. But the truth is, if 60% of the residents of the city can't afford the premiums, then what is the point? So you have to choose between paying your car insurance and paying for groceries. That's a Hobson's choice. It's not a fair choice. So we need that rate relief. I think it's going to be done in these two bills.
Bob Berg passed this past week. We all knew him as journalist. He served the longest serving governor of this state, Bill Milliken, and the longest serving mayor of the city of Detroit, Coleman Alexander Young. Your thoughts about Bob Berg and what he meant to the city?
A great loss, a great man, a very classy guy. I got to know him when I was a reporter for the Detroit News in our Lansing bureau when he was a press secretary for Milliken. I got to know him again or work with him again as a journalist when he came down to be Coleman Young's press secretary. The man exuded class, always available, he always honest, told the truth in these times, I think, when that is under the challenge, if you will, in some respects. Bob Berg was just a classy individual, always available, told you straight from the hip exactly how things were. Never saw him flustered, never have heard him issue a cuss word, unlike Mayor Young.
Unlike the mayor that he represented. Sometimes you need that balance.
But he evoked a sense of calm with reporters. And just a classy guy that you like to be around, you like to talk to, and it is a loss for all those who work with him, all the journalists who work with him. I think all of us feel his loss. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, and I'm going to miss him as are a lot of other folks.
Professor Hammer, you head up the Damon J. Keefe Center for Civil Rights at Wayne State University. Your thoughts about the man and the impact? I mean, people are coming from all around this country to Detroit tomorrow.
He had a global impact. I mean, think about some of the work he did in Russia at a time when that was not a popular thing to do or a safe thing to do. But I have to say that the judge is one of the best jurists this country has ever produced. And people need to understand the magnitude of that, just as a man and as a judge. Sitting on the bench for over 50 years. People have to kind of scratch their head and remember who Lyndon Baines Johnson was, and that's who appointed him in 1967.
Goes back a long way.
It does indeed. But people also have to understand that he was an amazing human being, and he combined those sort of traits of a great jurist, a great lawyer, with a great human being. And I think that's why you're seeing the groundswell of just sort of admiration and love coming out.
Butch Hollowell, I imagine you can't count the number of times you emceed his annual soul food luncheon, and he was like a father to you.
Yes.
And we always hear about Judge Keefe, the jurist, the length of time he was on the bench. But take me back a little bit. How good of a lawyer was he? You know, we always hear about a preacher's preacher and a doctor's doctor. Was he a lawyer's lawyer?
He was a great lawyer's lawyer. I mean, he used to represent Willie Horton, and when he was in private law practice, he broke barriers when he was a lawyer. You know, there was an unwritten rule in Detroit that black lawyers couldn't have their offices to the west of Woodward. His law firm located in the Ford building, and he broke that unwritten rule. He never wanted to play by those rules that were attempted to keep him down. And so he was very attached to the community, very attached to civil rights. And so when the opening came on the federal district bench, he wasn't necessarily the obvious choice. Some people were saying it should have gone to Otis Smith, but it's like the universe conspired to put this great man on the bench in 1967, as Peter had said. And you think about the impact that one individual had. Here he issues a ruling that says that President Nixon cannot wiretap someone's phone without a prior warrant under the Fourth Amendment. Here's a guy that integrates the Pontiac school system in the face of death threats from the Ku Klux Klan that was firebombing buses. Here's a man who integrated the Detroit Police Department and stopped this discriminatory practice that was going on at Detroit Edison at the time.
And was still making rulings when George Bush was president after 9/11.
Couldn't have secret deportation hearings is what he ruled. And he was vigorous and blistering up until the last moment that he died at 96 years of age.
We come back, I want to pick up with you because you knew him from a different level than everybody else on the panel today. We'll be right back talking about Judge Damon Keith. And we should also say that I wanted Judge Denise Hood to be a part of this panel. She very much wanted to be a part of it. Her docket just didn't allow for her to be here at the time that we're recording this, but she sent a statement that I'm going to share with the audience a little later in the program. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Luther, he was your uncle.
Yes.
Everybody's been reading the stories, watching the television and radio coverage of what his life and his legacy is. But your family, was there a side that the public didn't really see that says a lot about the man and the man he became?
Well, he was the
family secrets were
the
right there. Now,
there's no really family secret other than that he loved his family. And I'd like to say, he says, my relationship started with him. He drove me home from the hospital with my mom after I was born.
Really?
So that's where it started with him. But coming up, he was just a young lawyer. So I have memories of him, growing up in Detroit playing baseball in the alleys, and him coming back and playing baseball with us in the alley. Family dinners over at his house. My father was actually the oldest in the family. He was the youngest. So it was like a typical relationship. Your uncle loves you, goes over at family events. But as I got older, I became aware of the fact that he was a big-time lawyer, as Butch said, first when he was a lawyer for Willie Horton. And then as I got older, I would go down to see him at the courthouse, and I tell the story, I'll try to make it brief, where I asked him for $75 so I could take a trip out west, a camping trip in Montana, Wyoming. My parents, who had 4 kids sending them to Catholic schools, didn't have the money for $75. We're talking about 1967, 68, that era. And somehow I worked up the nerve to go to my Uncle Damon's office in the federal courthouse and said, Uncle Damon, could you loan me $75? Because my mother said, I don't have $75 to let you go look at mountains. But he said, sure, son, as he always called me, gave me the $75. At that point, I had never had a job. I got my first job at the Hudson's, old Hudson's, as a stock boy. My Aunt Marie Hurst, who was an elevator operator, got me a job for the Christmas rush, got my first paycheck, rushed down to the office, said, Uncle Damon, here's your $75. He said, keep your money, son, I don't need it. So to this day, I owe him that $75. But that was the kind of person, of course, and he just encouraged me in my career as I became a journalist.
He's a great mentor.
And he was a man of wisdom. So when if you had a problem or were in a crisis, he was always available there to talk.
He embraced young people. He let me paint his fence when I was in junior high. And after I painted the fence, I could sit in the house in some of the meetings that he had, so long as I could keep my mouth shut, you know, but he had a thing for allowing young people to have an exposure. His clerks have gone on to be the most distinguished judges and lawyers and leaders in our nation. And he always felt that they were a sort of a family. And outside of the courtroom, he was a man of dignity, but he was also had the common touch. He started the Freedom Fund dinner. He was one of the instrumental people that made it one of the NAACP's signature iconic events.
It is clearly the largest sit-down dinner of its type
in the world.
In the world.
Yeah. The largest civil rights fundraiser in the world as well.
Yeah.
So he spanned not just the bench, but community, and he embraced all.
But he created opportunities for others that would not otherwise exist. So you point to these clerks who are doing amazing, amazing things, and the truth is other federal judges wouldn't hire them.
We just saw Congress issue a contempt for the Attorney General of the United States. If Judge Keith were still with us, what would he be saying and thinking about what is happening with the challenges between the various branches of government right now?
I mean, he was a huge proponent of the Constitution. I mean, in some respects, what he did was revolutionary because he actually said the Constitution applied to everybody. But it's foundational. If you want to know what he believed, you just read the Constitution. So if you come down to this power struggle now, I think he would be a very strict kind of constitutional, saying, what are the powers of Congress? These are the powers of Congress, and they're going to be protected. And if the executive is going to overreach, then the executive is going to find out that there's a rule of law and not a rule of men in this country. And he would stand with the courage that he did against Nixon and Bush to say no.
I think absolutely. And you remember his phrase is that from the Constitution, equal justice under law. Yeah. That was his rock and everything.
He kept a copy of the Constitution in his pocket.
Right.
All the time.
He did.
Right. And he did stuff that wasn't popular. See, people, he did stuff that was not popular. As Butch said, he was threatened.
Well, there were threats against his life.
Absolutely. But, he believed that we should make this nation live up to what it claims to want to aspire to be. And that's not easy. Some people don't want that. And you have to confront that. So he was a humble man, but I said this before, he had a righteous anger about social injustice. And that's what drove him and drove these wonderful decisions that he made over the years.
So we at Community Arts Center at Wayne State University are having a simulcast because we're going to make sure that anybody in Detroit that wants to be participating in this celebration is going to have a chance to be there and see it.
And it'll be great for students as well.
Yeah,
and I would like to say just thank you on behalf of the Keith family to all the thousands of people who have given their well wishes and support to the family. It hurts to let him go, but it's wonderful to feel this embrace of love that has poured from every quarter. And I just want to say thank you to all of you out there in your viewing audience. It means a lot to us, and his legacy will stand the test of time forever.
All right, well, he certainly earned all that he is receiving. We want to thank you so much for coming in. When we come back, I'll dip back into our Spotlight archives and some interviews that I did with Judge Keith and others about Judge Keith. We'll be right back. Stay with us. U.S. District Judge Denise Page Hood said this about Judge Damon J. Keith. I first met Judge Keith when he was a U.S. District Judge. I was able to observe firsthand the manner in which he handled the cases before him and the attention he paid to litigants. He always listened carefully. His demeanor in court, his writing skills, and his rapport with lawyers all paved the way for other African American judges to be respected in the best way. Our country has lost a great protector of the Constitution. No surprise that he was chairman of the bicentennial celebration of the Constitution. He lived it in his daily life and most of his well-known decisions. You can read the judge's entire statement on WXYZ.com. I interviewed and profiled Judge Damon J. Keith twice at great length. Once on Spotlight when he took senior status, and another time when he was honored with the annual Ford Freedom Award. Here are some excerpts from those broadcasts. What has been the pinnacle of your career?
The wiretap case where I was able to enjoin President Nixon and John Mitchell from wiretapping without prior judicial approval.
And all these years later, no regrets about that decision?
No. We're all entitled to that. The rich and the poor, the white and the black, the Jew and Gentile, the male and the female. And that's what this is about now. We cannot suspend the Constitution in this time of hysteria.
Judge Keith's positions in cases were not only right on with respect to the intent of our forefathers in protecting that minority voice, but they're right on today as well.
David has been one of the most important jurists probably ever in the history of the United States judicial system.
And when Spotlight returns, diversity, equity, and inclusion with Frida Sampson and Steve Spreitzer. We'll be right back. We're back on Spotlight with Steve Spreitzer of the Michigan Roundtable, President and CEO, and Frida Sampson, who used to work at the Roundtable. She's now doing some consulting for the Roundtable and others. Welcome.
Thank you.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. A good segue from talking about Judge Keith, who you both knew. He would love the fact that you're doing an inaugural conference on this, wouldn't he?
What he did both behind the scenes and in front of the scenes are affecting our lives in meaningful ways for generations to come. I mean, I don't know if we can say thank you enough to such a life well lived, and Judge Keith just did a phenomenal amount of work for justice and for equity for everyone.
You were telling me off camera that you actually called him Uncle Damon because he was a member of Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, which your father was the illustrious pastor of for so many years. And there was a closeness there.
Absolutely. The Keith family was one of the first families that we became close with when we moved from Louisville, Kentucky. And so Gilda, Debbie, Gilda in particular, because we're the same age, we would play in the early days, and I affectionately called him Uncle Damon because they've been in our lives for as long as I can remember, certainly as long as we've been in Detroit.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about the inaugural conference for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's going to be this coming Thursday at Marygrove College. Why did you pull that all together? Why did the Roundtable get behind this?
Well, Chuck, we've been around 78 years, and over that time, you learn things. And for the last 20 years, we've been doing workplace diversity activity, and we're finding that the challenge that we face in Southeast Michigan with this history of segregation has taken a toll on people who are from this region. You know, research shows if you don't meet someone different by adolescence, you're relationally delayed, right? So, and if you come from homogenous communities where you really aren't engaging folks that are different in a meaningful way, you're going to bring that baggage to the workplace. And so to make a change so we can honor each other, right? So we can really allow people to bring their whole selves into the workplace, we need to make sure we aren't harming each other. And for some people, it's unintentional, unconscious bias is being perpetrated. How do you change that?
You grow up with it.
You grow up with it, and how do you create structures, including education and ways to sustain change so people can do better by their colleagues? So the conference really wants to help people understand the depth of this challenge, the complexity of it, and the need to take a more developmental approach. So that'll be the morning, and your previous speaker, Peter Hammer, who you had on the show here, will
he's going to do a session with historian Ken Coleman.
That's right.
Yeah, and talking about it. Frida, as you started consulting with the Roundtable and trying to shape and mold all of this, I know you have Dr. John Powell and others coming in. But this is one of the most segregated regions in the country, this Metro Detroit region, but yet we have tremendous diversity, but they aren't always interacting together, and it doesn't always manifest itself well in the workplace. But he's going to talk about, and others, about why this is good for business. Correct?
Right. So
this is good for the bottom line.
It's good for the bottom line. Studies have shown that globally, that when you are in an environment that is diverse, but more importantly inclusive, then you are able to bring the best creative and intellectual talent to the table and come up with the best product, whatever that widget might be, whatever that service might be. And it has been, studies have indicated over and over again that inclusion is the factor. Diversity is an imperative, but so is inclusion. And so just to have different people of different cultures in the work environment and not have a culture of inclusion does not get the job done. Sure. It is the capacity to really be whole in that space. And so one of the things that we are targeting in this, and that's why we're calling the conference with a focus around inclusion, because we're targeting what does that mean. That's the next step in this journey, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to make sure that it's a full circle.
Right. Yeah. And Dr. John Powell, talk a little bit about him and why it's important that he's coming in here doing this, because he's from California?
He's not from California. He's actually from Michigan, which is what's interesting, and he's an attorney. And he has been doing this work both with the Ohio State University, with the Kerwin Institute, and now he's with Haas Institute in Berkeley, California. And Dr. Powell has done intensive work, particularly around bias, but certainly around segregation and the impact of opportunities for people when in a segregated environment. And he's engaging corporations as well as organizations, faith-based institutions around the globe, really building a conversation and a greater awareness of how we can interact. So it's a real privilege to be able to have him with us. I think he's going to really blow our hair back. Again, he is a quiet storm. And so he requires you to lean in because he speaks softly, but he speaks with great wisdom and great power.
Steve, how involved are corporations with this? And is this mainly for corporations, or is it for everybody, but corporations may get the most out of this?
Well, I think we were expecting a number of corporate folk, but we have a large number of community people, police officers, mayors, school people, all of whom are dealing with diverse populations. So yes, I think the challenge that Dr. Powell is really going to help us understand is, what does equity mean and look like? What does it look? I mean, diversity and inclusion are important, but equity looks at the structural ways that this history of racism manifests itself, right? In the workplace, that may be your pay, that may be your place in the company. In society, that may be, we look at life expectancy, we look at wealth differential. There are so many ways
it cuts across all denominations.
So you can harm someone if you're relationally challenged, right? You might say something that'll offend somebody, but systematic racism really is a challenge. And so Dr. Powell is going to help us take a deeper look at these matters.
Frida Sampson, thank you so much for coming in. Steve Spreitzer, thank you so much for coming in. Once again, it's this coming Thursday. It's at Marygrove College, and I'm told that you can still get a few people in if you really hurry up and go to their website and register. And it will also be online at some point in case you can't make it there. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the spotlight. We hope you have a great week.